4 young lives stolen in the dead of night, a small college town shattered. And today, in a courtroom thick with tension, the man accused of one of the most chilling crimes in recent memory speaks just 2 words that seal his fate: guilty. But what led to this moment? Why did Bryan Kohberger, a criminology student obsessed with crime, admit to a murder spree that rocked the entire nation? Stay with us as we take you deep inside the courtroom, reveal the shocking confessions, and expose the final words that left the victims' families in tears. Before we dive into this gripping story, make sure to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Your support helps us keep uncovering the full truth behind the headlines. And trust me, you won't want to miss what's coming next. All rise. The judge's voice echoed across the chamber as Bryan Kohberger, dressed in a plain jail-issued uniform, entered the courtroom in custody. This was the moment everyone had waited for. Cameras clicked, eyes narrowed. A hush fell. The defendant sat flanked by his attorneys. The prosecution, composed and ready, stood opposite. The courtroom was full. Families of the victims, journalists, even those who didn't know the victims, but were drawn in by the horror of it all. The judge wasted no time. We are here today to entertain a change of plea. But before addressing the plea itself, the judge issued a firm warning to the public.
We are here today to entertain a change of plea. Before I start, I want to address some issues of concern and otherwise. First, I appreciate everybody in attendance today being on their best behavior. Please, no outbursts or demonstrations. Any such conduct will result in immediate removal.
For more understanding, let's summarize the court case and what was said. Today, you're about to hear the official courtroom hearing where Bryan Kohberger, the man accused of murdering 4 college students in Moscow, Idaho, enters a guilty plea. But behind this formality lies a harrowing and meticulous account of planning, stalking, and violence that unfolded on the night of November 13th, 2022. It began with formality and tension. The courtroom was full. Press, family members, attorneys, and law enforcement officers sat still, all waiting for the words that would forever change the course of this case. The judge called the session to order, confirming that Bryan Kohberger was present in custody, seated alongside his attorneys. His demeanor, quiet yet composed, marked the beginning of a proceeding that would draw nationwide attention. As the judge prepared to hear a change of plea, he first issued a warning. The public had attempted to influence the court by sending letters, calls, and emails, none of which the judge firmly stated would be considered. The rule of law, he reminded everyone, must prevail. Judges don't make decisions based on emotion, public outrage, or media narratives. The court only follows facts in the law. The prosecutor and defense counsel confirmed that a written plea agreement had been reached. Under this agreement, Bryan Kohberger would plead guilty to all 5 felony charges, 1 count of burglary and 4 counts of first-degree murder, each for a life taken on that night in November 2022. The terms were stark: 10 years fixed for burglary, life in prison without the possibility of parole for each murder count, all sentences to run consecutively. Kohberger waived his right to appeal, request leniency, or seek sentence reconsideration. Importantly, this wasn't a Rule 11 plea deal, meaning the court wasn't bound by the agreement. The judge could technically impose a different sentence. But in practice, the plea secured the harshest legal outcome short of the death penalty. Before accepting the plea, the judge needed to ensure that Kohberger was pleading guilty voluntarily and that he understood the consequences. One by one, the judge asked him detailed questions. Are you under the influence of any drugs or alcohol today? Do you understand the penalties for these crimes? Has anyone threatened or promised you anything to plead guilty? Kohberger answered calmly. Yes, I understand. No, Your Honor. With every response, the court documented that his confession was voluntary, intelligent, and informed. Kohberger admitted guilt not only to burglary, but to stabbing each victim with deliberation, malice, and premeditation. Now came the most chilling part: the state's official record of evidence that would have been presented had the case gone to trial. Investigators traced Kohberger's phone activity to show that he had stalked the area around the 1122 King Road residence at least 23 times before the murders. He'd studied the layout, He knew the routine. On November 13th, 2022, in the early morning hours, Kohberger left his Pullman apartment, turned off his phone, an intentional move to avoid detection, drove his white Hyundai Elantra across the state line into Moscow, Idaho. Surveillance footage captured his car circling the neighborhood multiple times. Around 4 a.m., he entered the house through a sliding glass door. Inside were 6 college students, 4 of whom would not survive. Kohberger moved to the 3rd floor. There, he stabbed Madison Mogan and Kaylee Goncalves. He left behind a sheath from his K.A. bar-style combat knife, which bore his DNA. Descending the stairs, he encountered Zana Kernodle, still awake, possibly having just received a DoorDash order. He killed her too. Then Ethan Chapin, her boyfriend, who was sleeping in the room. 2 other roommates survived. One of them saw a man in black clothing and a mask leave through the sliding door. By 4:20 a.m., surveillance footage showed Kohberger's vehicle speeding away from the scene. Later that day, Kohberger returned to the crime scene area. His phone pinged nearby. Was he revisiting his actions? Checking for evidence left behind? He took a selfie later that morning, smiling in his apartment bathroom. In the days that followed, he Googled where to buy replacement knife sheaths, attempted to delete his Amazon purchase history, changed his car's registration to Washington plates, which required a front license plate, unlike Pennsylvania. Law enforcement eventually tracked him back to Pennsylvania, where they recovered trash from his family's residence. DNA on the knife sheath matched DNA from Kohberger's father. He was arrested at his parents' home, flown back to Idaho, and charged with the murders. What kind of person commits such a crime and studies the very science of how not to get caught? Bryan Kohberger was a PhD student in criminology. He had written papers on crime scene processing. He had the textbook knowledge of how evidence is collected, and yet he left behind his own DNA. The judge and prosecution both acknowledged this wasn't a man who acted out of sudden passion. This was calculated, premeditated, cold. His apartment, when searched, was meticulously clean. So was his car. No trace of the weapon has ever been found. But what remains is damning digital and biological evidence. At the close of the hearing, the judge accepted Kohberger's guilty plea, finding it voluntary and supported by a factual basis. The sentencing hearing was scheduled for July 23rd, allowing families of the victims to deliver impact statements. Bryan Kohberger now awaits that day, no longer cloaked in the presumption of innocence. He is, by his own admission, the murderer of 4 young lives. The court may never fully answer the why behind his actions, but it has answered the who. In the end, it wasn't one mistake that brought Kohberger down. It was dozens of them. Phone pings, car cameras, DNA, surveillance, search history, timing. He was a man who thought he was smarter than the system, but the system was watching, and it was ready. The arrest, 2,000 miles from the crime scene. Bryan Kohberger was taken into custody on December 30th, 2022, at his parents' home in Albrightsville, Pennsylvania, over 2,000 miles away from the Idaho crime scene. He didn't run, he didn't resist, but he also didn't talk. According to officials, he seemed calm, detached, as if he'd rehearsed this moment. Inside the police cruiser as he was transported, officers noted something unsettling. He asked if anyone else had been arrested. A curious question, especially from someone who, by all accounts, acted alone. The ride to the courthouse. In the hours following his arrest, Kohberger said little, but he watched everything. One detective reported that he kept looking into the rearview mirror, as if checking who was behind him. Others described his behavior as flat, clinical, even when told he was being charged with 4 counts of murder. No remorse, no questions, no emotion, no confession, but not quite silence. During formal questioning, Kohberger exercised his rights. He did not confess. He did not offer a motive. He asked for a lawyer, but he made one cryptic statement. According to a source briefed on the case, "You have the wrong guy." That line would echo through the media for weeks, but prosecutors didn't flinch because the evidence didn't lie. Surveillance, cell towers, DNA, vehicle matches, his own online behavior, and finally, in his own admission of guilt in court. The final plea. On July 2nd, 2025, in an Idaho courtroom surrounded by families whose lives he destroyed, Bryan Kohberger stood and uttered the only words left: guilty. He offered no explanation, no apology, no motive. But the law didn't require one. He received 4 life sentences without parole, plus 10 years for burglary. The death penalty was taken off the table as part of the plea. But for the victims' families, the pain remains. "We didn't get justice," one parent said. "We got finality. There's a difference." Who was Bryan Kohberger? A quiet, awkward academic, a criminology PhD student, a man who asked convicted criminals how it felt to kill. Did he want to understand murder or experience it? We may never truly know. But what's clear is this: he wasn't a criminal genius. He wasn't a mastermind. He was a man who thought studying killers made him smarter than the system. It didn't. The legacy of 1122 King Road. The house is gone, the students are gone, but their names remain. Madison Mogan, Kaylee Goncalves, Zana Kernodle, Ethan Chapin. They were more than headlines. They were young, brilliant, and deeply loved. Their loss reshaped a university, a community, and a nation. Epilogue, July 23rd, sentencing day approaches. At sentencing, the victims' families will speak. They'll share the stories that matter, the laughter that echoes in their homes, the holidays that will never be the same. And they'll look Bryan Kohberger in the eye one final time. Not for justice, not for closure, but to remind him they are the ones who live on. If this story moved you, please subscribe, share it, remember their names. Because when we forget the victims, we let the monsters win. This has been the story of Bryan Kohberger, but more importantly, the story of those he could never silence. Thank you for watching.